What is the purpose of the respiratory system? The purpose of the respiratory system is to deliver oxygen to our body cells and remove carbon dioxide from our body cells. We breathe in oxygen and breathe out the carbon dioxide. And the overall purpose is to make ATP. ATP is made by the breakdown of glucose in the presence of oxygen, which results in carbon dioxide, water, and 36 ATP. This oxygen must be delivered to the body cells where cellular respiration takes place, and the carbon dioxide, which is a toxic byproduct, must be removed from the body cells so that we may breathe it out. So we call this process cellular respiration, and it takes place in our body cells. So the entire respiratory function involves bringing the oxygen into the lungs, carrying it from the lungs to the body cells. And then once in the body cells, the carbon dioxide is released, and that carbon dioxide must be transported back to the lungs where we can breathe it out. Respiratory function can be broken down into 5 stages. The first stage is called ventilation. This involves the inhalation of oxygen and the exhalation of carbon dioxide. The destination for oxygen here is the alveolus, and in this stage, the destination for carbon dioxide is the outside air. The next stage is called external respiration, and this involves the exchange of gases between the alveolus and the pulmonary capillary. Here, the oxygen that has arrived at the alveolus diffuses across and enters the pulmonary capillary. The carbon dioxide that has been brought from the body cells leaves the pulmonary capillary and diffuses into the alveolus so that it can be breathed out. Once the oxygen has reached the capillary, it can now travel. It travels in the direction of the heart. It arrives at the heart via the pulmonary veins. So here we see the oxygen arriving via the pulmonary veins to the heart, and from the heart it can be pumped out via the aorta and taken to all parts of the body. The oxygen now arrives at the body cells. In the body cells, carbon dioxide is formed, and so carbon dioxide is released from the body cells, and it can be transported back to the lungs, first via the veins, systemic veins that take it to the heart, and then the pulmonary trunk that takes it to the alveolus. We call this stage transport. Oxygen is using systemic arteries to transport itself to the body cells, and carbon dioxide is using the systemic veins. The next stage is internal respiration, which is the exchange of gases that takes place between the systemic capillary and the body cells. Oxygen diffuses from the capillary to the body cells. Carbon dioxide diffuses from the body cells to the systemic capillary. The next stage and last stage is cellular respiration. The oxygen that has arrived in the body cells can now be used to break down glucose and make ATP. Carbon dioxide is the toxic byproduct. The goal of inhalation is to move atmospheric air into the lungs. Remember that air moves down the gradient, so the pressure inside the lungs must be lower than the atmospheric air pressure. So in order to understand inhalation, let's address 3 types of pressure. The first is atmospheric pressure. In New York City, for example, at sea level, the atmospheric pressure is usually around 760 millimeters of mercury. The intrapleural pressure changes according to the needs of ventilation. If you are inhaling, the intrapulmonary pressure is going to be lower than atmospheric pressure. The third type of pressure is intrapleural pressure, and that's the pressure in the pleural cavity that surrounds each lung. So the atmospheric pressure must be greater than intrapulmonary pressure. And intrapulmonary pressure must always be greater than intrapleural pressure. And this way, air moves down the pressure gradient. If the intrapleural pressure is greater than intrapulmonary pressure, it can cause the lungs to collapse. In order for exhalation to occur, we should take a look at the three types of pressure again: atmospheric pressure, intrapulmonary pressure, and intrapleural pressure. Here, the intrapulmonary pressure must be higher than atmospheric pressure, and this is because air moves down the gradient. So it's higher in the pulmonary and lower outside. Atmospheric air, however, always maintains the same pressure at sea level, but the intrapulmonary pressure can be changed by the position of the diaphragm and the rib cage. Intrapleural pressure must always remain lower than intrapulmonary pressure, or else the lungs will collapse. To recap, in order for exhalation to occur, intrapulmonary pressure must be higher than atmospheric pressure for air to move down the gradient. So what happens if the intrapleural pressure is higher than the intrapulmonary pressure? The danger of that is collapsed lung. Another name for the collapsed lung is a pneumothorax. Pneumothorax. Thorax meaning chest, and pneumos means air. So air has entered the chest cavity, and as a result, the pressure inside the intrapleural space has increased, and it is higher than intrapulmonary pressure, and that has caused this lung on the left side to collapse. In this figure, we have on the right a normal lung, and on the left side, we have a collapsed lung. And this has to do with the differences in intrapleural pressure. So on the right lung, the intrapleural pressure is normal, and it is lower than intrapulmonary pressure. On the left side, the intrapleural pressure has increased for some reason, and its pressure is greater than intrapulmonary pressure, and this causes the lung to collapse. Another word for the collapsed lung is pneumothorax. Pneumos means air, and thorax means chest cavity. This means that air has entered the chest cavity, causing the intrapleural pressure to increase and collapsed lung. There is one type of trauma that can lead to a pneumothorax, and that is a knife wound to the chest. When there is a knife wound to the chest and the knife is removed from the point of entry, then air can enter the pleural cavity because the atmospheric air has a much higher pressure than the air in the intrapleural cavity. So the air enters the pleural cavity quite easily, causing the intrapleural pressure to go up. The intrapleural pressure now is greater than intrapulmonary pressure. This pressure pushes against the walls of the lung and collapses it. The treatment for the pneumothorax is to remove the excess air from the pleural cavity until the intrapleural pressure goes back to normal. So what is surface tension? Surface tension is the property of water molecules to be sticky and form a tight layer. So pure water can form a tight layer over a surface. And this is because the water molecules like each other and they're very sticky. This layer is so tight that even an insect can walk on water. So imagine this insect is walking on water. Now, if you were to add some soap to this water, the soap would get into this layer of water between the water molecules, and as a result, the surface tension of water decreases. That is the effect of soap on water. And it's so low, the surface tension, that this layer is no longer maintained, and these little insects might even fall in. So in order to understand what all this has to do with alveoli, we need to talk about bubbles. So let's take a look at bubbles. Let's imagine that these are small bubbles made out of pure water. This is pure water, and these are bubbles. Now, we all know that bubbles made out of pure water don't last very long. They burst because the water molecules that like each other, they try to stick to each other and they release the air inside. So they don't last very long. If you were to use pure water to wash your clothes will just get rinsed, but they won't get cleaned. The reason is that water molecules like each other too much and they don't enter the fibers of your garment. However, if you were to add soap, let's add some soap to this, and you create large bubbles. And these large bubbles are basically water plus soap. What soap does is that it gets in between the water molecules and creates a larger bubble and a longer lasting bubble. Because the water molecules are separated from each other, they can actually enter the garments, the fiber of your garments, and actually clean them, which is why we use soap. Soap by itself cannot clean. All it does is that it separates the water molecules, so the water molecules can actually get in and clean your fibers. So now if you were to imagine alveoli to be a bubble, we want the alveoli to be large. For the alveoli to be large, they need surfactant. Surfactant is a chemical that's produced inside the alveoli. So let's imagine this to be an alveolus. So this surfactant keeps the alveolus nice and big and expanded so that when you breathe in and breathe out, the alveoli do not collapse like a bubble. So more soap, bigger alveolus, and more soap, lower the surface tension. So the most important thing we need to remember here again is that the surfactant lowers the surface tension of water inside the alveolus, lowers the surface tension in the alveolus. Another kind of lung collapse can happen in neonates. In some neonates, the lungs are not fully developed. As a result, the surface tension inside the alveoli tends to be high. This high surface tension causes the alveoli to collapse when the neonate tries to breathe out. So let's see how a premature baby or a neonate ends up with respiratory distress syndrome. So when a baby is premature, the lungs are underdeveloped and the level of surfactant production is quite low. When there is no surfactant or very little surfactant, the surface tension in the alveoli increases, is quite high. As a result, the lungs collapse because the alveoli collapse when exhalation takes place. We call this respiratory distress syndrome. The treatment for this is to administer surfactant through the trachea and using a tracheal tube, and the surface tension of the alveolus decreases, causing the alveoli to expand and go back to normal. The mucociliary escalator is found along the trachea. Its job is to remove the dust particles or smoke or other toxins out of the lungs and towards the throat where you can cough it out. So this is found along the lining of the trachea. We've already seen the lining of the trachea, so let's draw the pseudostratified columnar epithelial cells. So we have the cilia here, and you might have a goblet cell that releases mucus. So here are the cells, and these cells, they produce mucus. So this mucus that's running here carries along with it all the junk that we breathe in, and we want to take it out of the body. So we don't want this to reach the lungs. So this are the red spots that you see here are the debris that we want to remove, and the space here is the mucus. The mucus is being driven up. It's kind of like an up escalator, and it's being moved by these cilia. The cilia drive the mucociliary escalator upwards. If the cilia are destroyed by cigarette smoke, then the mucociliary escalator will not work as efficiently, and the toxins end up in the lungs. On the other hand, patients suffering from a genetic condition called cystic fibrosis, the mucus production is problematic. In these patients, the mucus is highly dehydrated, so it tends to be gummy and sticky. As a result, the mucus is not slippery. As a result, the mucus cannot keep the toxins and debris out of the lungs.